Good morning. Good morning. Yes, summer hat. There's only 10 more of these shows before I go on holiday, so I'm getting in the mood. Good morning to Andy Stevens, who's just joined us. Haven't seen him for ages. Morning, Andy. How you doing? Great work with the Build network and keeping MPs on their toes. Fantastic job. Well done, sir. Who have we got here? Dan Cullen is in the house. There he is. Saying let's rock and roll. What do we got here? Mark Whiting is here as well. Morning, Mark. Ken Hatcher is enjoying mainly sunshine, but with a little bit of cloud stirred in. Jim Turner is here as well. And Dan saying, "Oh, cool hat." It's not that cool actually. I'm really sweating buckets here. I'm sat in a pair of shorts, the lightest t-shirt I can find, and a summer weight hat, and I'm sweating golf balls. Good morning, everyone. How are we doing? Chris Ford is here as well. Good morning to Chris. Good morning to all my fellow co-pilots. Good morning to you, Chris. How are you doing? How was everyone's weekend? I have to say, had a good one. Actually, had all four of my children back under one roof for a barbecue on Saturday, which was really quite pleasant. Got to be enjoying that. As I say, it is a 10-show countdown. I've got all of this week, so 5 shows this week, 5 shows next week, and then on that obviously ends on the Friday, and then on the Saturday after that, I'm jumping on a train, going to Stansted, getting on the plane, going to Rome, going on a train all the way to Civitavecchia, and then I'm getting on a cruise ship and vanishing for a couple of weeks. So bear that in mind. Now, on the subject of today's show, I don't know if you can see it. On my screen, it tells me which show this is. Obviously, it's the Breakfast Show, but the number of the show, I don't know if you can see that. So if you can't, here is a clue on the number of shows that we've produced in this format. There were others before, but this is the number of shows we've done in this format. If that was too subtle for you, I can tell you, this is show number 966. That obviously was the Cat 966. 966 of these shows. By the time I go away, it'll be 976, which means that sometime around about the middle of September, thereabouts, we will be producing our 1000th show in this format. I have to say that for those of you that have been around, I mean, I know Ken Hatcher goes back all the way to the very beginning. When we very first started, this was sometimes an afternoon show, sometimes it was a morning show. It wasn't called the Breakfast Show. It was, I don't know, Demolition News Live or something like that. And we did the best part of 100 of those over the course of the very early days of COVID, and then lo and behold, we switched it up a bit when it turned out we weren't going back to work anytime soon, and this is where we ended up. So yes, 966 shows. Without further ado, I do think it is time that we get the show on the road. So let me roll the intro, post the question of the day, and get this show on the road just as soon as I can find my intro, which looks like this. Yeah, as I say, Ken Hatcher was here from the very beginning. He says, you started in COVID. We did. We started in March 2020. Went right the way through. They were daily shows, but they weren't called the Breakfast Show. We went right the way through, all the way to February the following year, so 2021. At which point, and this was, I'd like to say that there was a big planning meeting and strategies drawn up and stuff like that. There was no such thing. I was literally sat here on a Friday afternoon, and the idea of it being a demolition related show, and I took breakfast show, and I thought, what do demolition people do? They break fast show. That was all it was. If you remember rightly, the old thumbnail used to actually be a hard hat on a table of my local cafe with a full English breakfast and a hard hat. It was the Break Fast Show. It was a play on breakfast, and that started in February 2021. And here we are, 4.5 years later, still banging the same drum. Dan says it was a fantastic idea, and long may it continue. Well, I've got nowhere else to be, Dan, so you're okay with that. It is Monday, the 14th of July. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. I am your host, Mark Anthony, the Walrus of Demolition, the Lord High Chancellor of live streaming. And in today's show, we're taking a walk around the hot new mini excavators from Bobcat. You'll be green with envy over the new electric mini from LiuGong. We're taking a closer look at the latest grader from Caterpillar. And we have a self-loading truck that it kind of redefines efficiency. I think you'll enjoy that. Plus, in my morning monologue today, construction, where freedom of speech is turned upside down, which will make a whole lot more sense when we get there. Before we crack on, have I done the question of the day? Yes, I did, but I'm going to remind you of it just the same. It looks like this. Yeah, our question of the day today, like the hat, comes once again from our resident quizmaster, Mr. Gary Muirhead. And his question is this: what was your first job? Now, just to clarify, I'm not including things like paper rounds or car washing, both of which I did in my teens to earn a few quid, as we all did, I'm sure. I'm talking about actual full-time paid work. Now, personally, I started in the accounts department of a contract furnishing company, and it was awful. I realised, there are worse jobs out there, but it was awful. I worked with an old woman. She only ever spoke when there was something to criticise, which was usually me. And I also worked with a younger woman who played Pink Floyd albums non-stop throughout the working day. Now, I was never much of a Pink Floyd fan in the first place. By the time I'd finished there, I hated Pink Floyd, still do to this day. I only actually lasted 3 months in that job, and it would have been a lot less, but they made me work a month's notice. I'd had enough after about 2 weeks. Thought I could stick it out. My father said, that's how work is. No job is ever good. You just have to tolerate it. And 6 weeks later, it was like, do you know what? There's no way I'm doing this for the rest of my life. Called it a day, and they made me work the month's notice. Couldn't wait to get away. But what about you? What was your first job? First full-time paid job? What was your first job? Let us know in the chat. We'll come back to that a bit later on. It is time to crack on. So let's roll this, and I'll fire up Bobcat in just a moment. 'You may recall we interviewed a guy here a good couple of years ago, so it wasn't the last Baumer, it was probably the Baumer before, a guy called John Christofides, Bobcat. He's actually retired, I think, now. Morning, John, if you're watching. But he was talking about the fact that the Bobcat's stated ambition was to be the biggest compact equipment manufacturer in the world. Obviously, we know them for their skid steers, we know them for their compact wheel loaders and their compact track loaders as well. But they are quite the force in mini excavators, even more so now.
"40 years ago, we introduced our first mini excavator, pioneering a new era in compact construction machinery. Today, we proudly present our all-new generation of 1 to 2 ton mini excavators, the E16, E17Z, E19, and E20Z models. Over the years, we've continuously improved our machines, pushing the limits of what's possible. Each model and feature shows our dedication to excellence and passion for perfection. We've listened to you, our customers, understanding your needs and challenges, and use your feedback to design the best mini excavators in this category. With this new generation, we are not just launching 4 machines, we are unveiling the future of mini excavation. These machines offer unmatched performance, comfort, and reliability. Experience the best in mini excavation, experience our new generation of 1 to 2 ton mini excavators. And happy digging!
Yeah, we've got some more details coming of those in the next couple of days, so keep an eye out for that. I'm going to go back to question of the day. I've just had a bit of a news flash, actually, which I'll bring you in just a moment. Let me do the first things first. Going back to our question of the day, which is, what was your first full-time paid job? Dan Cullen says, now that's quite the baptism of fire. His first job was on a trawler 400 miles out at sea, even though he doesn't eat fish. Wow. What a waste. What a waste. Still, if you don't eat fish, that just means there's all the more for me. Jim Turner says he started at 16, fitting ceilings, partitioning, shop fitting, and other building work all over the UK. Very, very quickly, I just go off at a tangent slightly. The son of a guy I used to work with went into a similar sort of trade, shop fitting and partitions and stuff. And he was working in Harrods one night. Overnight, the store was closed. And for about a week, they'd had the place to themselves. And then all of a sudden, middle of the night, they've heard not a commotion, but they've heard people moving around. I thought, well, that's weird. There's not usually anybody here. Turned out it was Mohammed Al-Fayed giving a guided tour to Michael Jackson. Yes, Michael Jackson was strolling around in Harrods after hours, picking up stuff. Yeah, there you are. Dan Cullen says, question of the day, was 2 years at that, then went to a cold storage warehouse working in freezers. Is that why you like the cold? Is that why you like the cold? Minus 40 degrees, loved it. Used to stay in them for hours at a time on the forklift. Wow. Yeah, I'd have been, my teeth would have shattered by then. They'd have ground together so much and have fallen out. I promised you we'd had a news flash, and we have. I've got it to show you right now. There we are. Just had this in from the fine folks over at Construction Inquirer. Apparently, the Trade Remedies Authority, or the TRA, is actually having a bit of a rethink, potentially at least, on this anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese excavators. You'll know we brought you details of this. This was a complaint brought originally by JCB, was upheld, and there was tariffs imposed on all of the Chinese manufacturers, pretty much, all to varying degrees. But it also included companies that would have taken you by surprise, like Caterpillar, for example, because some of their products are made in China and they are brought here. But now the TRA is reconsidering a ruling which imposed tariffs on Chinese excavators imported into the UK. The TRA ruled last year that tariffs up to 40% should be imposed following a complaint from JCB about the dumping of diggers by Chinese manufacturers. But it's now considering its recommendations following appeals from LiuGong Group and Caterpillar. LiuGong has claimed that battery electric machines should not be included in this and removed because from the description of the goods and all related tariffs. Dean Thornwell, apparently, who is the managing director of LiuGong UK, says it's a short-sighted move that conflicts with the UK's ambitions around net zero and sustainability. Caterpillar has also questioned the TRA's calculation of the individual anti-dumping amount that was calculated for it as the sampled cooperating overseas exporter to the original investigation. Apparently, they have asked the TRA to recalculate the injury margin. And just rounding this off, the TRA have said at the end of the reconsideration process, the TRA will reach a reconsidered decision, either upholding or varying its recommendation, and will notify this to the Secretary of State for Business and Trade. So that one has still got some time to go by the sound of it. But yes, it could. We could see a removal or a what's the word I'm looking for? A weakening, a lessening of the tariffs imposed on some of those companies, particularly LiuGong and Caterpillar. And I have to say, I kind of stand with LiuGong on this. We're going to show you a LiuGong electric excavator in just a moment, which is nicely coincidental. But if you are determined to have a net zero country, you kind of want access to net zero type equipment, do you not? I think our friend Mick has just arrived. Morning, Mick. How are you doing, my friend? Good to see you here as always. And thank you for your message over the weekend. Very, very welcome. And if your niece is here, good morning. What do we got next? Yes, I promised you LiuGong in just a moment. And I'm a man of my word, unlike many in the part of the industry that I occupy. Here we go.
If you are enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the show. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.
Yeah, I don't need to tell you anymore, but it's LiuGong, zero emissions, lovely green machine. You make of this what you will. LiuGong Electric, very smart too. Just don't forget our question of the day, which is, what was your first job, your first full-time paid job? We'd love to hear all about it. Back after this, we're going Caterpillar next.
Since the finance bill came into effect in April, the construction industry has seen a surge of fuel thefts. The rising cost of living has placed an additional risk of theft by employees and contractors, as well as opportunistic thieves. By using diesel dye and placing warnings of its use, you are sending a clear message that this is your fuel.
Yeah, Caterpillar is constantly renewing its grader range, and this is the latest model. Enjoy. Never driven a grader. Would still like to. If anyone from Caterpillar or any other, Bell maybe, if you've got a grader hanging about somewhere, let me have a spin. I'd like to take one of those for a drive. Going back to my question of the day, which is, what was your first full-time paid job? Our friend Mick says, first job was in the print. What a mug I was to leave it. No, well, funnily enough, that was my second job. I quit my job in the accounts department of a contract furnishing company. My dad was already working in the print as a chauffeur. This is back late 80s or mid 80s, actually. And the only way you could work in the print, I'm sure our friend will actually back me up on this. The only way you could get into the print business was it was a closed shop, so you had to become a member of the union first. And generally, you only got to hear about the jobs either because you were a part of the union, or you knew somebody that worked there, friend, family, or whatever it might be. That's how I got in. So that was me. I was a member of NatSopa, the NatSopa union, long before I was a member of the NUJ. Chris Ford, on the same subject, he was a tractor driver, general farm worker, shoveled shit, and spread it around. Fantastic. Dan enjoying the music there as well. Graders, very useful. Mike Woof of Global Highways, who knows a thing or two about graders, which I'll mention in just a moment. I think I mentioned this before, Mark, but my first full-time job in a grain merchant near Edinburgh, assistant grain dyer. Is that dyer or is that dryer? I'm going dryer because it then goes on to say, we had to dry barley so it could be used in the production of whiskey. The equipment broke down frequently and spilled rotting barley meant there were mice and rats as well as feral cats. Good preparation for working in construction, I would say. But yes, I'm definitely going with grain dryer. They don't dye grain, do they? I'm sure they don't. But yes, grain dryer. But listen, Mike, for those of you who don't know, Mike is Scottish and he worked in the whiskey industry. Quelle surprise. But he also says graders very hard to drive, incidentally. Yeah, I think that's why I've always been put off. When you go, I don't get invited these days, but back in the day when you used to get invited to Malaga with Caterpillar, here's an array of equipment. What would you like to drive? Oh, the dozer for me, please. Not the grader. No, the dozer. Thank you very much. That'll do me just nicely. Ken Hatcher's first job was driving a backhoe loader. Didn't stray too far then, Ken. Don't blame you at all. Attempted to cut the hound's nails yesterday. Didn't realise what a fine and full set of choppers he has, so gave up just to be on the safe side. Yeah, unfortunately, our recently deceased big fella, Diesel, had a real thing. Almost to the point of he was phobic about his feet. You could rough and tumble with him, and he was a big old, like 8 stone of dog, and you could, really give him a good roughing up, literally stroke his feet, and he'd try to rip your throat out. I don't know whether he'd had some sort of issue with his feet. I don't know whether somebody had trodden on his feet when he was a pup or whatever it might be, but one way or another, yeah, and things like trimming his nails. I tell you, the last time we went to the vets before he sadly passed away, a vet and 2 veterinary assistants tried to trim his nails. I think they got 4 out of however many a dog has, and in the end they were like, no, we'll give up. We'll give up while we're still alive. And yes, apparently it was grain drying. Now we know. What do we got? We got one more thing for you, which is a little bit unusual. I don't think we've actually featured one of these before, so stick around and I'll surprise you in a second. Ken Hatcher just mentioned the fact that he started life on a backhoe loader, which, as we all know, a backhoe loader does a multitude of jobs with one machine. There are other machines of a similar ilk that do, think of the Mechalac, does multiple things with a single machine. Like this. I like that. What do you think? What do you think? I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, that's about it for the main part of this morning's show. I'm going to roll the outro in just a second before leaping gazelle like over into my morning monologue, which is kind of different today. A little bit different. You'll see if you stick around. If you can't stick around, then please stay safe. Look after yourself, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. I hope to see you again very soon. Tomorrow for the latest in the 10-day countdown to my holidays. So after today, there's only 9 more shows before I'm away for 2 weeks. So if you have the time and the inclination, I will return shortly after this. If I wanted to, I could come here every day and criticise the government. I could criticise their politics and their policies. I could call out where their actions don't align with their words. I could highlight the competence or otherwise of individual ministers and their departments and their decisions. I could point out that their ambitions for housing and infrastructure are wrong-headed, and that we're more likely to see the second coming of Christ or West Ham crowned champions of Europe than we are to see 1.5 million new homes built in the next 4 or 5 years. I can rage at the shortcomings of the construction industry's training providers and the various card schemes that prop them up. I can highlight how they are both failing to produce enough competent workers to meet current demand, let alone that expected in the future. I can call out trade associations as the old boys club that so many of them are. I can point out their elitism and their failure to do anything meaningful for their members or the industry they claim to represent and support. I can rail against equipment manufacturers for making safety features an optional extra, for selling machines with known stability issues, for producing machines that are great for publicity, but not so great for anyone wishing to use them. And I can do all of this because I was born, raised, and I live in a country where free speech is a given. It's a fundamental right. If you have any doubts that that is the case, you only have to look at the airtime afforded to a political outsider like Nigel Farage. In short, I am free to hold those in authority to account. To coin a phrase, I am free to punch upwards. What I can't do, however, is punch downwards or even sideways. I can't say anything racist, misogynistic, or homophobic. I can't criticise people for their race, creed, colour, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. I mean, I could, but I would face a backlash from my viewers, readers, and subscribers. I'd also potentially face punishment or even banishment from the online platforms that I use, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And I'm okay with that, because here in regular society, we all know where we stand. We can criticise the powers that be, but it's an offence to cause offence. Now, let's step through the portal to the parallel universe of the modern demolition and construction site, a place where the norms of free speech are inverted, where the whole notion of what you can and cannot say has been turned upon its head. Here, apparently, misogyny, homophobia, and racism are not just back on the table, they are laid out like a sumptuous buffet. You can say what you like about who you like, or don't, and you can do so with impunity. Want to point out that your female colleague's high-vis vest doesn't fit because her boobs are too big? Feel free. No one will bat an eyelid. Want to question a colleague's sexuality because he hasn't had a girlfriend in 6 months? Go right ahead. Feel like saying those with black skin are lazy, those with brown skin are likely to be terrorists, and those with yellow skin are only good for the preparation of special fried rice and wonton soup? In all likelihood, your words will be met with laughter from everyone except your chosen victim. It may not be encouraged or publicly supported, but it's sure as hell tolerated. Here on site, you have an invisible shield, a get-out-of-jail-free card. When you enter a site, you take off your civilian clothes and you shed societal norms. You put on your PPE and you simultaneously put on a cloak of invincibility known as banter. Here on site, you can now punch downwards as much as you damn well please. In all likelihood, you'll be applauded and celebrated for doing so. But let's not forget, this is the upside down. While you might be able to question a colleague's sexual preferences, the religion of your brown-skinned co-worker, or make lewd comments about your female co-worker's bedroom activities, What you can't do is call out those in authority. Your site supervisor might be an incompetent arsehat with zero experience, poor man management skills, and questionable personal hygiene. But you dare not say as much, because that person has the power to make your life truly miserable. The site upon which you're working might be demonstrably and catastrophically unsafe, but you keep it to yourself. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to be labelled a troublemaker. Site management might expect you to work under conditions that are bad for your physical well-being and your mental health, but you take it on the chin because they hold in their hands the keys to your future employment. You can't point out that just because someone holds a plastic card of a certain colour does not make them qualified or even competent. You can't call out the constant and incessant pressure placed upon you from above. You can't talk about how you're effectively being bullied on a daily basis, how you're being urged to cut corners to meet deadlines, how you're expected to look the other way over mismanagement, drug and alcohol abuse, corruption and criminality. Outside the site holdings in the real world, there are rules and regulations to prevent those in power from abusing that power. In the upside-down world of demolition and construction, such abuse is commonplace. It's normalized. Those in authority have the ability to make your life impossible while you work for them, and then make it impossible for you to get a job if and when you leave. Criticize those below or beside you, and your words will probably be ignored or quietly supported. Criticize those above, and you could find yourself doing a series of increasingly shitty jobs, working longer hours without additional pay, or being urged towards the exit. You might also find yourself blackballed, your job reference skewed to highlight your perceived shortcomings while ignoring the skills, experience, and expertise and value you can offer. The upside-down world of speech freedom will not impact most people, particularly those right-minded souls that are quite content to go through life without causing undue offence to those around them. But if you are suddenly overcome with the unstoppable desire to say something sexist, racist, ageist, homophobic or transphobic, make sure you're on a demolition or a construction site first. There you are. I'm switching hats. That one is getting very, very hot. I'm going with that one. There we go. How are we all doing today? That was my my inverted freedom of speech. You get what I'm saying. What have we got here in the chat? Going back to the graders, Chris Ford says, years ago, a grader driver explained his job was like wrestling with an octopus with all the levers. Yes, there's a lot of pushing and pulling. Are they still like that? Are they still like that? Or can we all just do it with a button now? I actually don't know. Dan says, I've seen one of those mixers back in the early 2000s on the Pier project. Thank you very much. Now, Andy Thornton says, psychosocial risk is a major issue in the construction industry. I worked on 3 PAS standards with the BSI, with the late Sir David Arness, and ISMA, the International Stress Management Association, back in 2010, and still today, this is still a problem. Yes, it is. It is. You might remember, and I do think this may well have been before the Breakfast Show became the Breakfast Show. We actually had on this show a guy who had been basically blackballed and blacklisted, and spent years and years, despite the fact that he was very experienced, very good at his job, spent years, absolute years, basically trying to fight the powers that be. They not only had he been sacked from his job, but word had gone around the industry, oh, this guy's a rabble rouser, he'll be unionising your sites and causing you all manner of trouble, and he couldn't get a job for love nor money. It happens. It does happen. And bearing in mind, this is a discussion we've had on this show before. Ours is, particularly when you're at sort of site level, ours is an industry where CVs and what have you don't really have a great deal to do with anything. If you apply for a job, the chances are your wannabe employer is likely to pick up the phone and speak to your previous employer, and that previous employer might actually say, "Oh, yeah, Peter McKenna, yeah, what a fine, upstanding fellow he is. You'll be lucky to have him." He could quite easily say, "No, the guy's a pain in the arse. He's constantly bitching and whining about this, that, or the other. Wouldn't touch him with a barge pole." And there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. Peter McKenna, speak of the devil, says, Why is everyone quiet about your monologue? It was fantastic and fitting. Thank you, Peter. I don't listen. I don't know. Listen, I don't want to start conspiracy theories here, but would it extend to watching a show? If somebody were to put in the chat now, you're absolutely right. That is pretty much my life summed up. I'm surrounded by homophobes and misogynists and racists. They are doing drugs and they arrive for work drunk, and I can see the backhanders going on. Would you necessarily go public and admit that, or would you keep your head down, which is kind of what the entire monologue was about? I don't know who that is because I can't read their name, but they've just said hi from Facebook. I'm going to say hi back. Good morning to you. Thank you very much indeed for being here. Where are you watching from? That's what I'd like to know. What is that? I don't even know if that is that? That doesn't even look like a language. That just looks like symbols to me, but I don't know. But let us know. Where are you watching from? Yeah, going back to this morning monologue. It does, and I was exaggerating it for artistic effect, but literally, I could sit here and say Keir Starmer is doing an absolutely terrible, terrible job. Angela Rayner, waste of space. Rachel Reeves, completely out of her depth, and so on down the line. I could do all of that, and nobody would bat an eyelid. I sit here and I criticise the CITB and Build UK and the NFDC. I do that on a regular basis, and I'm sure most of them don't enjoy it, but I'm free to do that. What I can't do, if I were on site, I couldn't criticise my direct boss. I couldn't criticise the line of management. Criticize the company, because it will get back and be a problem that could carry with me for the rest of my career. Dan says it's against the law now to give someone a bad reference. They can take you up for not getting jobs. The problem with that, Dan, and I'm aware of that, and you're absolutely right, and thank you very much indeed for pointing it out. The problem with that, again, goes back to this notion of ours is, in some ways, a paperless industry. In some ways, it's got way too much paperwork. If somebody were to put in writing, yes, Dan Cullen never arrived on time ever in his entire career, complete waste of space. If they would put that in writing, you would have every right to take them to some sort of tribunal and you follow the letter of the law. But what about if it's just word of mouth? How do you go about proving that? If somebody phones up and says, I've got a bloke here applied for a job, apparently you had him a few weeks ago, a guy called Dan Cullen, what do you reckon? And the guy lets rip and says, what a pain in the arse you've been. Prove it. You try to prove that that's exactly what's happened. I think you'd struggle. Peter says, Dan, that's wrong. It isn't illegal as long as it's true. Well, there is that. Yeah, there is that. Do you know what? Very quickly, I'll get onto that comment in just a moment, because I want to reflect on something very quickly. And I don't know if you know this. My youngest daughter, Courtney, the apple of my eye, she really is. But she's deaf, or almost entirely deaf in one ear. When she left school, from the age of 7 or thereabouts, she has been absolutely mad keen on music. Forever, buying music, downloading music when she was old enough, attending gigs and that kind of thing. I took her to her first 2 Glastonburys. She's gone pretty much every year since. Still goes into London for gigs of bands that nobody's ever heard of and stuff like that. But when she left school and decided she was going on to college, she decided that she was going to a music college to basically train to become a singer. Now, becoming a singer, not the easiest gig in the world. Even harder if you're hearing impaired, which she most definitely is. And I do remember saying to her, of all the things you could have chosen to do, you have chosen one that basically plays upon your very obvious weakness. The reason I mention that is we've just had this from Mick. We were talking about his niece the other day, who is a young lady, and she is also gay. Good luck to her, is what I say. Did I mention the other day that apart from the snide remarks about my niece and her sexual preference, she is also of mixed race. So you can imagine some of the things she goes through. And most times a right-hander has sorted it, I have to admit. Bearing in mind all that I've just said about what is, I'm not saying it's encouraged, but certainly what is tolerated, I feel like your niece has chosen the hardest possible career given all that she is. It's hard. It's going to be hard because she's female. It's going to be harder because she is gay. And it's going to be even harder because she's mixed race. And that, I don't know what, I mean, my morning monologue today was about 1,000 words. They normally are about 1,000 words because that equates to 5 or 6 minutes once I've tripped over my tongue and stuff. I needn't have bothered. I could have just put that on the screen. Because that is precisely what we're talking about here. If you are female, if you are gay, if you are brown, mixed race, call it what you like, you will face an uphill battle on UK demolition and construction sites in 2025. Now, I mentioned the notion of walking, when you walk onto a demolition or a construction site, this notion of stepping through a portal, okay? When I was a kid, Benny Hill was on the TV. And listen, and Carry On films as well. Now, as a kid, I always thought pretty harmless fun. You know, a little bit lewd, a little bit crude, but, you know, just what it was. I grew up with The Sun and the Daily Star with their page 3 girls with their boobs out. And again, I would say pretty harmless fun. But we now know in 2025 that harmless fun is not necessarily harmless for everybody. We don't have page 3 girls anymore. We don't have Carry On films anymore. We don't have the Benny Hill show anymore. Because we've all moved on. We've all said as a society, we are not going to tolerate that. You've only got to look at what's going on here at the moment. I mean, by all accounts, he's a bit of a wrong one anyway, but all that's going on with Greg Wallace, you know, and what he's supposedly been up to on MasterChef and so on down the line. We are, as a society, we do not tolerate that. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior. We don't tolerate racism and sexism and ageism and homophobia and transphobia and all of the other things. You put on a hard hat, you put on a high vis, and all of that suddenly becomes acceptable. Isn't necessarily the word, but at least tolerated. You know, if I were to say on, you know, there's a high street just down the road from me. If I were to go there and say quite loudly to one of my friends, "Core, look at the knockers on her," I would be, you know, if the woman turned around and slapped me, well done, I deserved it. If she then reported me and the police arrived to have a quiet word with me about my behaviour, I fully deserve that. You step onto a demolition or construction site, nobody would say a bloody word. In fact, the chances are those around you, including your superiors, would laugh and, you know, probably join in. That's what we're talking about. Wolfie says, this is going to sound like me being a stupid smartass, but when females like another female, it's called lesbian. Gays when two guys like each other, but don't sweat it. Listen, this is where I fall down. This is where I fall down. Because I'm well aware of LGBTQ+. I'm aware of all of that. But I don't care. And I don't care because I don't care. If you're a lesbian, good luck. If you're gay, good luck. If you're trans, good luck. If you don't care. You do you. I genuinely don't care. I don't care how you identify yourself. I don't care about your pronouns. I don't care who you sleep with, who you don't sleep with, who you find attractive, who you don't, because that's your business. Nothing to do with me. But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Wolfie. But that's the point. I don't care what colour you are. I don't care what football team you support, unless it's Spurs, in which case you and I might have an issue. I don't care about any of that. None of that matters. None of that matters, because that's you. That's part of your makeup. Jim says it's only hard if she's surrounded by the wrong people. This is going back to Mick's niece. The problem is, though, Mick, I mean, you've worked on enough sites. You hear the banter. You hear all the stuff that goes with it. I said this last week, and Dr. Yvonne Waterman was, I don't think she was actually on the show, but she was listening. And I spoke to her a couple of hours afterwards. And she said, I found it quite interesting, the fact that you talk about demolition and how much you love demolition, but you wouldn't recommend it as a career for your daughter. And it's for that very reason. I wouldn't want my daughter to be exposed to the kind of thing that is tolerated on UK demolition and construction sites. As a career, if I could wrap her in bubble wrap, and I realise this is equally relevant in office environments and retail and everything else, if I could wrap her in bubble wrap and protect her from all of the abuse and the sexual advances and the sexual harassment potentially, and yes, demolition and construction does offer a fantastic career path. There is a ladder that you can climb and everything else, but you can't wrap your child in bubble wrap. And they will, if it's your niece, in Mick's case, if it's my daughter, whatever, you are opening them up to that. And this is not just a gender issue. This is a race issue. It's a sexual orientation issue. If you're, by and large, if you're not white and male and straight, demolition and construction sites are not a fun place to be. Peter says he didn't say good morning because he'd already said that on Saturday. Yes, he'd actually checked in for this show on Saturday, 2 days ago. Jim says the secret to a happy life is surround yourself with the right people. All the others can get fucked. The issue with that, obviously, is you probably don't know, do you? Think about when you actually apply for a job that will require you to work on site. So you get on the blower and you say, I've got these cards, I have these level of competencies, this is my experience, and they say, oh, absolutely fantastic, you're precisely the sort of person that we're looking for. Come along, we'll give you a week's trial, or maybe just the job's yours. We've checked you out, we'll give you the job, and you arrive in your fresh new PPE, you go through your induction, everything's hunky-dory, you get out on site, and you suddenly realise that you are now working alongside Britain First, the anti-gay league, or what? I'm making shit up right now, but you've basically been thrown to the wolves. And what do you do at that point? Which is kind of the whole idea of the monologue. What do you do at that point? Go back to your boss and say, listen, I'm really grateful for the job opportunity, and I'm really excited about the job. But have you spoken to these people? Have you met these people that I'm working with, who are openly racist, homophobic, misogynistic, potentially even sexual predators? And I'm not talking about the touchy-feely, although I'm sure that does happen. But if you're a female and you are constantly exposed to sexual, not right. But do you do anything about that? Do you go back to your boss? And if you did go back to your boss, what would be the reaction? If you've just arrived for that new job, and let's say you're one of 10 people, and you, as I say, you've got some that are racist, misogynistic, anti-gay, anti-whatever it might be. They're racist, they're anti-Muslim, whatever it might be. If all of that is happening, and you complain to your boss to say, you've basically dropped me into a pit of vipers here. Everybody I work with in one way or another is a wrong one. Are they going to fire the entire crew, or are they going to ask you to leave? Last in, first out. Andy says, this is something I'm working on. Watch this space. Intriguing, sir. Intriguing. Mick says, the annoying thing about all of this, the company she works for are backing her to do all these courses, but they tolerate the abuse she puts up with. Never have they openly backed her up. They may have a quiet word, but never sacked anyone. She said to me, I got you. I have my goals and the words don't bother me. So fuck them. Listen, she sounds like a tough lady, and good luck to her. But nobody. Listen, I don't care whether you are male, female, black, green, whatever religion. Nobody should go to work and have grief. It's bad enough. It's bad enough that you have to leave your wife, your partner, your children, potentially, your dog, the comfort of your own home to brave the London streets, assuming this is London, to go out in the streets and do all these things. It's bad enough that you have to go to work to earn a living, to pay your rent or your mortgage. Nobody wants to work, by and large. It's bad enough that you do that. Why the fuck should anyone have to put up with that? Even if you're a straight white male, 16 years old, you go to work on a demolition or construction site, you are going to get grief. You are. There is, and I know back in the day we used to laugh about, indoctrinating the apprentice and all that sort of stuff. But really, I mean, what you're actually talking about is bullying. That let's make no bones about it. It's bullying, and I'd actually think it's been made worse by the advent of these things and social media. Because back in the day, you might do some sort of wind up on the apprentice or the young rookie. Now, all of those things are way more extreme, often physical, and they're all recorded and put on the internet. You imagine that. You're 16 years old. You're still living with mum and dad. Maybe you've been to college or whatever it might be, but you're still a bit green, and you're thrown into an environment where you're surrounded by big, burly, hairy-ass men who, for the first month that you're there, basically physically and mentally beat you up every single day. How's that fair? How's that right? Peter, I'm with you on this. We all bleed the same colour. Yeah, we all bleed the same blood, no matter what our preferences are in life. Yeah. Do you know, I know I take a very simplistic view of the world. People are people. I don't understand how you can look at another person who is a different colour to you, has a different fashion sense, has different likes or dislikes, and decide, no, we are going to be mortal enemies. I genuinely, I don't understand it. I don't understand it at all. It makes no sense to me. Gary Muirhead is here. Morning, Gary. Sorry I'm late. Not a problem at all, Gary. But stay after school because I'll need the quiet word. Wolfie says, "Oh, good man. I really don't care that much either." No. Jim says, your daughter would fit right in our gang. We spend a lot of time talking about bands and music. She'd love that. She'd love that. That's more or less how she spends her life, really. Dan says, exactly, I had that problem. Your face didn't fit with the guys on the floor. Yeah, listen, you know full well that the way that this works in reality, if you arrive on a site and let's say there's 10 guys, one's a rampant homophobe, one's an out-and-out racist, one has got a serious issue with anyone that's gay or trans, so another one's got a real issue with anyone that's Muslim, and all that sort of thing. And you arrive on that site and you hear this going on a daily basis, oh, this brown person did that, this Muslim did that, fucking gay people. What are you going to do? Are you going to stand up to them? I mean, I'd love to think that you would, but what does that do to your day-to-day life? And if you do stand up to them, the chances are, one way or another, you will be either urged towards the exit or you'll be shoved out of it. That's the truth. Dan says they expect you to get in line and join in with their banter. Yeah. Yeah. And unfortunately, all the time that this is tolerated, you know, and I'm not, let me be clear, I don't believe this is class is the wrong word, but a thing that impact or is impacted by your role, because a lot of people sort of work their way up. So it's not a case of, you know, anybody that is not a supervisor can be a racist or a homophobe and everything else. But if you're a site supervisor, you're expected to be otherwise. That's not the case, because that site supervisor will hear all of this going on. They'll see all of this going on. They'll see the female digger driver arriving to find a dildo's been stuck to the front screen of a digger. It's their job to nip that in the bud. Not to take the woman to one side and say, oh, you know, they're a roughy-tufty bunch, this lot. Oh, they're quite the laugh when you get to know them. No, they're fucking not. No, they're not. The people you should be taking to one side are those people. Think about it further. If you go to work on site, you go through, not only do you go through your regular training, so how to operate a machine, for example, asbestos awareness, various competencies and stuff like that. You are also told about the do's and don'ts of the site. You know, don't work at height, make sure you wear a harness, blah, blah, blah. I'm preaching to the choir here. You all know what those are. Is it not beyond the wit of man to take those same people to one side and say, oh, and by the way, while you're doing all this, don't be a sexist twat. Don't be a racist. Don't be a misogynist. Don't be a homophobe. Because that, like working at height without a harness, on this site, that is not tolerated. Trust me, here, it is not tolerated. This site here, I lord over this. This is my domain. Never mind Keir Starmer. Never mind King Charles. This bit inside this hoarding, this is my domain. And I will not put up with your bullshit homophobia, racism, sexism, and so on. What? Why is that not happening? Andy says this is about individual safety, proper team management, corporate policy, and government legislation. All four need to be addressed. They do. They do. What I find strange about this is if I were to, I don't work in an office anymore, but I did. I did for quite some time. If I were to be openly sexist or homophobic or racist in an office environment, it feels like there are rules and regulations. There will be an HR investigation. I'd be given a warning. I'd probably be given another warning. After the third warning, they'd say, "Here's your cards. Fuck off." That process does not appear to have made it onto site. Mix says, one last point, all the trade bodies harp on about abuse in all forms, but what really have they done to even try and get rid of it? Nothing. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the, I think that actually makes it worse to me, is there does seem to be either a belief that they have done something about it, or they are trying to cover up the fact that they haven't. So, we get the, oh, look, we've painted our machine in pride colours because we're supportive of the gays. Look at us, we're supportive of the gays. Are you? Are you? If you had a gay digger driver who was, driving a machine that wasn't garishly painted with the rainbow, and if somebody discovered on site that he was that way inclined, and he was abused, he was called a puff or whatever it might be, and he came to you and said, I'm getting grief here. People have discovered the fact that I'm gay. Not that I'm ashamed of it. I'm openly gay. But now I am being abused for it. Do you go the extra mile and have some sort of tribunal, or do you just push it under the carpet? Has anyone heard of anyone being sacked, reprimanded, anything for being sexist, racist, homophobic? I haven't. There's blackguarding and there's bullying. The difference between the two is malice. We aren't particularly PC, but we treat everyone as an individual. If folk are sound, they're looked after. It's a fine line, and I do. I think this term banter has got a lot to answer for, because it does feel sometimes like it is little more than a get out of jail card. You know, it was just banter. But that person there, that brown person, that female person, that gay person, is offended by that. At which point you have to say, well, is that really tolerable in this day and age? Is it really? Wolfie says, I'm off to work. I low-key get the feeling I'm an hour early, though. Not sure if we're still on a 6 a.m. shift or went back to 7 because only one other guy is here. Don't you hate that? Don't you hate that? I get once a year, I go for an eye screening. One of the signs of diabetes worsening is they check your eyes and they find some sort of deterioration behind your eyes. And I went to my eye clinic maybe 6 months ago and arrived to find that the clinic was in darkness. I thought, well, that's weird. I mean, I was about 10 minutes early, but I thought, that's weird. Turns out I was a day early. So, yeah, I know the feeling. By the way, the Lordy bit comes from her grandmother. When I turn up on her door asking who was upset, she'll tell. Yeah, I bet. Dan is off. Have a great day, guys. Yes, be good, Dan. Look after yourself. Thing is, the boss is frightened they wouldn't have any workers at the end. You're right. You're absolutely right. But I will liken it to this. I've had issues over the years with a number of people not paying their bills. I won't work with someone who I know is unlikely to either pay me at all or pay me in a timely manner. You know, I pick and choose. So as a result of that, as far as I'm concerned, I will have nothing more to do with them. This is the same thing. Do you really want your workforce, just to keep the wheels turning, do you really want your workforce to be an offensive horde? Or would you not be better off being more selective about those that you employ? And I wonder about this, very, very quickly. Something we've touched on, I did mention it in the morning monologue, but I'll mention it again. One of the things that we've touched on in the past is this idea of drink and drugs. If somebody turns up on site, you know, with a proper company I'm talking about here, they turn up on site and they're clearly the worst for wear, they're high or they're drunk. The actual procedure is you can't just fire them on the spot. If they're directly employed, you can't fire them on the spot. In fact, in many cases, you are expected to offer them some sort of counselling, some sort of rehab, and so on down the line. But you can't just say, you're pissed, you're fired. Not as simple as that. So there are terms and conditions of employment that are in place to stop you turning up drunk or high and so on down the line. Should we not have the same thing for sexism, racism, homophobia, ageism and stuff? Has anyone come across that? Has anyone got any terms and conditions that actually lays out the fact that things like ageism and sexism and homophobia will not be tolerated? I've not seen one. They may exist. I've not seen one. Jim Turner says, it's banter when everyone is inclusive and enjoying the interaction. Anything else is bullying. Precisely that. Precisely that. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that. I mean, I do quite like that notion of punching downwards. You know, if there are 10 of you and you all have a common point of not a victim, but if there's something that all 10 of you agree is worthy of pointing at and laughing and stuff, that's fine. But if 9 of you are now pointing at that one person who isn't quite like you in one way or another, that to me is singling them out for bullying. It really is very, very straightforward. Mick said to Dan, he's free this Saturday. If the pair of you are the same, let me know. Yeah, I did have a message from Dan on that. To be perfectly honest with you, I haven't checked with my social secretary, which is my wife. She's due back here in about an hour. I'll have a word, see how I'm fixed. I know we've got some bits and pieces to do with in-law, with her mother-in-law and stuff, but I'll keep you posted on that. Andy Thornton says this is purely culture. What is ignored today is tolerated every day after. Yeah. It is that normalization, and I'm not going to go off on a political rant here, but when you look at all that's going on with American politics, I'm fairly sure that 99.9% of the entire world are fully aware of the fact that President Trump is a liar. He lies for a living. That's what he does. That's his shtick. He did it when he was a property developer. He did it when he was a reality TV star, and he does it as a politician. He lies and he lies and he lies. The problem now is, rather than calling out his lies, everyone just goes, that's just Donald being Donald. No, it's not. He's lying to the population of America and the world. A bit like West Ham winning the Champions League. Yes. Not in my lifetime, I fear. Peter says, it's not banter, it's cowardice. Silence is complicity. And therein, that right there is precisely it. It is precisely it. I don't want this to come across as me being all heroic and stuff, because I'm not. And when I tell you the full story, I'll prove that I'm not. Not this house, but the house we used to live in. You'd come out of off my drive, do a right, and then do a right, and then do a right. That was what led you out into the main road. It was a journey that I used to do 2-3 times a day. Could do it with my eyes closed. The car knew the way. It was all done on autopilot. Anyway, went out one evening, did the first right, did the second right, and there was a guy, maybe 6'1", 6'2", quite a big, burly fella, and he was with what I assumed was his girlfriend, but she's about 5'1", and he's literally in her face. I mean, really, really going for it. Well, because of the momentum of the car, I drove past, and despite the fact that he was bigger than me, younger than me, and everything else, it was like, I can't. There's no way I can continue this journey. So I put the brake on, put the thing in reverse, went back, wound the window down, and I said to the girl, "Are you okay?" And she went, "Yeah." I said, "Look, if you want to get in the car and me to take you wherever you need to go, get in now. I will not let this guy stop you." And she said, No, it's just an argument and everything else. And he actually put his head through the window and he said, "We are having an argument. I really appreciate you stopping, but it is just a boyfriend and girlfriend having an argument." At which point I left. I'd like to think that all turned out properly and everything else, and that she wasn't too scared to say anything. But when was the last time anybody stood up on site and went, "No, I'm not having that. I'm not having that"? What you just said is so far beyond what is properly tolerated these days. I'm not having that. I'm not having you speaking to that girl, that guy in that manner. I'm just not having it. Have you seen it? Most politicians are liars. It's the norm. And do you know why it's the norm, Jim? Because we have allowed it to become the norm. The number of times that, back in the day, go back 30 odd years, and my dad used to watch, I can't remember the name of the program, was it like Today or something like that, with Robin Day with the big bow tie, and he was a very, very good political interviewer, very good journalist. And he would he would ask a question and a politician would give an answer. And I'm fairly sure it was Robin Day. No, it wasn't. It was Paxman, Jeremy Paxman, probably better known as the host of Open or University Challenge these days, but a good hard-nosed journalist back in the day. And he had struggling to remember the guy's name. He was the Conservative Party leader at the time. May have even been Michael Howard. Michael Howard. He had Michael Howard on, and he asked him a question. And Michael Howard did the politician thing. Well, what I'd like to say is, no. Asked it again. He ended up asking the same question 13 times. As a result of that, I mean, I don't think he ever actually got the answer, a straight answer. But as a result of that, Jeremy Paxman came out looking like there's a guy that's done his job, and Michael Howard came out as a liar, somebody's seeking to conceal the truth. And Michael Howard, within months was finished. That's what we're not doing now. It's hard for me to compare because I operate in a different realm. But if I was invited to, the NFDC AGM, and they one of them, the president or whatever, said something that I knew to be patently untrue, my job is to call them on that. Hang on. Well, hey, hang on. What you just said there is not true. What is true is this. And I will fight my corner on that. And now, Mike Wolf was here earlier. We've never had this, but I'd like to think, there is a core of journalists in this field. There was a famous case a couple of years ago of, I think he was with CNN. There was a reporter called Jim Acosta. And he called Trump on something. And as a result, Trump basically told him to shut up and get out and, did the Trump thing. Rather than actually giving a credible, truthful answer, he decided that Jim Acosta was fake news and he should sit down and shut up. The press corps, Jim Acosta gave way, he yielded and gave way. The rest of the press corps then asked Jim Acosta's question again and again and again. Now, if I were at a press conference and Mike Wolf asked a searching, a probing, a difficult question, and he was told, "You're out of line, get out of our press conference," I would make a point of asking that question again because it deserves answering. We don't do that anymore. We don't hold our authority to account. Yes, we'll go on to Twitter or X or Instagram and bitch and whine about, but we don't, as a formal journalism, as a formal society, we do not. We've now accepted the fact that our politicians, who are, let's not forget, answerable to us. They work for us, not the other way around. They work for us. But we have accepted the fact that they will lie to us. And if they don't lie, they will not answer a straight question with a straight answer. And we have accepted that. Much the same as we have accepted racism, homophobia, ageism, transphobia on site. We as, who was it said it? There you are. Silence is complicity. That's exactly what it is. Scared to lose a loudmouth? Then you're not a leader, you're a spectator and a coward, by the way. Stay safe, gents. Need to prune back the tomato plants. Catch you all later. Have a good one. Thank you very much indeed. There's Dr. Yvonne Waterman saying thank you on behalf of that girl. Listen, and it's, what is it about men? What is it about men? You know that I couldn't possibly be a sexist because I've got two daughters. No, I'm not sexist because I'm a human. Yes, I do happen to have two daughters. Yes, I happen to have a wife. Yes, I happen to have friends who are female. Yes, I have a mother and an aunt and grandmother. But I'm actually not a sexist because I'm a human being. And I don't need to do that. There's, Mick says, I think you're right in the first place, mate. Robin Day wore the bow tie and he was bloody good. Yes, he was. Would love to see Frost and Day have a debate. Yeah, I mean, therein lies an issue. Can you imagine today You remember the whole, I mean, they turned it into a movie. It was that famous. The whole Frost-Nixon, David Frost interviewing clearly corrupt President Nixon. Imagine what a Robin Day or a David Frost would make with Trump. I mean, to the point where I don't think he would ever agree to it, because he would be terrified that they would tear him a new one, which he so richly deserves, incidentally. But that's a whole other story. Anyway, people, that's about it for today's show. I've overrun somewhat, but that's the way we roll around here. We just keep going until we've exhausted the subject. I'll be back tomorrow with yet more of the same, probably a different hat, almost certainly a different hat, because it's warm in here. Everybody have a fantastic day. Look after yourself. If there's a woman on your site at the moment, or a brown person, or somebody quite young, or somebody quite old rather, or somebody that is openly Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, do me a favour, do yourself a favour, do them a favour. Say something nice to them. Won't cost you anything. Might actually improve their day. Have a good one, everyone. I'll see you soon. Mick says, later, gents, and Andy Thornton says, very good show. Thank you, Andy. I think we probably need to get you on here as a guest, don't we? Feels like that's about right. And if you're working on these things in the background, feels like that's a good time to do it. Andy, let me know if you fancy a bit of that. I'll see you tomorrow, people. Have a good one. All the best.